felt that way. We feel, it feels a lot like our country has become the place that can't get anything done. And here we are with 40-year highs in inflation, 1/5 of Canadians skipping meals and cutting back on portions because they can't afford the price of food. Fuel prices have doubled. 35-year-olds live in their parents' basements because they can't afford a home. You know, I was in Vancouver and I used that example, and I actually asked the crowd, if you are 35 living in your mom's basement, as are so many Vancouverites, how do you bring home a date? There was an elderly lady in the crowd who yelled out, very carefully. But seriously, imagine the psychological impact it has. If you are 35, you can't own a home, means you can't build up credit history, collateral, home equity for your eventual retirement. You can't have a family if you don't have a house to raise them in. And this is in the country with, I think, the 5th most land per capita of any nation on earth. We have more land where there's no one than we have land where there is anyone, and yet we can't find a way to house all of our people. You know, and then we can't get energy projects done. Here we are importing 130,000 barrels of overseas oil every single day, even though we have the third biggest supply right here at home. You know, according to the OECD, we have the 2nd slowest building permits of any of the OECD countries. We're only slightly ahead of the Slovak Republic. But the average building permit in Canada takes 250 days to procure. In South Korea, it is about 26 days. So you get a permit there 10 times faster than you get one here in Canada. You know, here in Vancouver, or nearby in Vancouver, sorry, Vancouver's in the Greater Surrey region, of course. It's a small town nearby. But anyway, the port is ranked 368 out of 340 ports around the world, according to the World Bank. So, you know, this is incredible here in Canada that we are failing to perform on so many of these levels. This week I was at a sweet shop, and it's a Punjabi sweet shop, and the owner took me up next door to his restaurant. Beautiful restaurant, beautifully furnished, decorated, wonderful chandeliers hang from the ceiling, and one problem, no people. I looked around, it was like a ghost town. It was like something out of one of those, you know, those movies about a post-apocalyptic period when there's been a nuclear attack and all the people have been wiped out, but all of their infrastructure remains. And you walk into a beautiful restaurant and it's decorated, the plates are there, the cutlery is set, but there's no one to eat, dine, or to serve the non-existent customers. That's what it was like. And I said, what's the problem here? And he said, well, I can't get cooks. I said, well, why don't you bring in more cooks? You know, there's lots of cooks in India who understand how to put together the great recipes of the Punjab and serve them here to the population. He says, well, the problem is that it takes something like 4 years to process the applications for work permits. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, he had timed his plans to build a greenhouse so that he could grow his beautiful tomatoes and herbs and spices and garlic and bring it from his own greenhouse over to the restaurant. But unfortunately, he didn't make that investment, which would not have been profitable because he doesn't have an active restaurant of which to serve it. The reason he didn't make the investment is because the municipal bureaucracy still hasn't approved his permit to build the greenhouse. And so he can't build the greenhouse, he can't get cooks for his kitchen, he can't get started. Meanwhile, there are people who love to be dining at his restaurant. There are waitresses and other support staff who could have jobs if the governments at the various levels would get out of the way, give him his permits and give him his cooks and let him get started. As I said, we have become the gatekeeper economy, where there are accomplice gatekeepers who stand in the way of people achieving their dreams and their goals. We are, of course, a nation of immigrants here in British Columbia. We have countless immigrants who've come to build the country, but many are prevented from working in their own professions because they can't get a permit to practice in regulated fields like medicine. And meanwhile, we have shortages for doctors and nurses, another gatekeeper effect. So what's the solution? The solution is we need to stop stopping and start starting in this country again. And that's the kind of prime minister I want to be. I want to unleash the full potential of our nation by getting the government out of the way and off your back and by your side. So what does that mean in practical sense? Let's start with housing. In Vancouver, the cost of government baked into the average house, that is permits, delays, zoning changes, consultants, development charges, taxes, is $650,000 per unit of housing. That has helped make Vancouver the third most overpriced housing market on planet Earth. More expensive than Singapore, Manhattan, London, England, and other places with more money and people and a lot less land. And so we need to get these government gatekeepers out of the way so that we can build more homes. How are we going to do it? I know it's a municipal issue, but the federal government provides a lot of money for infrastructure to cities. So the Poilievre government will link the number of dollars big overpriced cities get to the number of houses that actually get built, so that we incentivize municipal bureaucracies and politicians to speed up and lower the cost of building permits. I will sell off 15% of the 37,000 federal buildings so we can convert those buildings into affordable housing for our young people. In other words, we need to print less money and build more homes. And we need to speed up immigration of people who can help us build those homes. We have a skill shortage in the skilled trades. Yet we have 2.6 million immigrants waiting to come here. Many of them are tradespeople. I went to A1 Trusses with Brad Viss just yesterday. They build trusses that you need for homes, but they don't have workers to pound the 2x4s together and shape those trusses. So we need to have a skilled trades special stream that can be expedited so we can bring in those skilled workers, or not necessarily having a skilled designation, but that are in high demand, that have a job offer, and have an employer who's standing by to pay them who cannot find a Canadian to fill that work. Then when they get here, we need to expedite their conversion from temporary foreign worker into permanent resident to keep them here permanently so that we permanently fill the gaps we have in our labor market, particularly to build things like houses. We need to get the gatekeepers out of the way of our immigrants who are desperately needed in our professions as well. And that is why Poilievre government will work to sign deals with the provinces who are responsible for regulating the labor market to get a 60-day guarantee. Within 60 days of an immigrant applying to work in their profession, they should get a yes or no based on their tested abilities, not based on where they come from. That we should back up 30,000 federally backed up study loans for immigrants who want to take time off work so that they can study up to reach the Canadian standard and work in their profession. They did this in Calgary. A bunch of oilmen signed loan guarantees for new immigrants who were stuck in low-wage jobs but were very close to being licensed in high-wage professions. They couldn't make the leap, though, because they needed 3 months off work in order to do the studying and take the exams. But you can't do that if you're on the verge of being evicted from your apartment because you don't have any money. So they gave them study loans. They left their work for 4 or 5 months. They studied for their exams. They passed their exams and watched their incomes go up by 400%, 500%, 600% as they went from being a barista or an Uber driver to being a doctor or an engineer in just a very short period of time. The Poilievre government will back up study loans like that so that our immigrants can pole vault into high demand, high paying, inflation-proof paychecks in the professions of this country. We're also going to remove the gatekeepers from our energy sector. Here we are importing all this oil from overseas, which means we send dollars abroad. It's one of the reasons why our dollar is so weak right now. It used to be that our dollar would track WTI. When the worldwide oil price would go up, the Canadian dollar would go up relative to the United States. That correlation has been broken. Why? Because our energy sector is a significantly smaller part of our economy now. The result is that our consumers are paying more. When we as consumers bid on internationally priced commodities like oil or grains or natural gas, we pay more when our dollar is worth less. And so all of us as consumers are paying the price for such a weak energy policy by our federal government. We've had the Prime Minister kill two major pipelines, the Energy East pipeline, which would have taken 1 million barrels of Western oil to Eastern refineries. He's killed the Northern Gateway pipeline, which was supported by 80% of the First Nations along the route. And yet the Prime Minister vetoed the project after it had previously been approved without even consulting First Nations, killing billions of dollars of opportunity for those communities, including job opportunities that would have lifted countless youth out of poverty and into prosperity. So the Poilievre government will repeal the anti-energy law C-69 and replace it with a new law that consults First Nations, protects our environments, but gets projects built so that we can become truly natural gas. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of this stuff right beneath our feet, and we could be exporting it to Asia and to Europe. Look, we have the shortest shipping distance to Asia from anywhere in North America, and we have the shortest shipping distance to Europe from anywhere in North America. And we have the best climate for liquefying natural gas. How do you liquefy a gas? Cool it. You cool it down. You guys don't know anything about cold weather here. I was surprised we had that answer. Somebody told me that there was snow here last night, but it was gone before I woke up in the morning. That's not snow. That's a hallucination. Snow falls in Ottawa and it doesn't leave for 8 months. So. But anyway, but it does get cold in Ottawa. In fact, it was so cold last winter there were actually Liberals seen with their hands in their own pockets. I'm not supposed to be quite that partisan, am I? It's up to me. Free speech. I'll be conservative in my remarks if you're liberal in your applause. Is that okay? Okay. Good. Well, listen. But back to natural gas. We have cold weather. We have emissions-free hydroelectricity in Newfoundland, Quebec, British Columbia. What does that mean? We can liquefy natural gas with the lowest emissions of any country on Earth. We can use our cold weather as a 25% energy advantage for liquefying the stuff vis-a-vis the U.S. Gulf Coast, where they have an extra 25 degrees of heat they have to pull out of it. And we can use our emissions-free hydroelectricity in the aforementioned provinces to power the liquefaction facilities. And then we can use our shorter shipping distances to send our gas to Asia to displace dirty coal-fired plants in China and in India, reducing global emissions, and ship our gas from Newfoundland and Quebec over to Europe to displace the natural gas hegemony that Putin has over Europe. In other words, let's break this dependence. Let's turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people in this country. Do the same for the minerals of the future. You know, for decades, the geopolitical strength that the Gulf states enjoyed because of their preeminence in petroleum is now shifting to China, because of course they have a major lead on refining rare earth minerals like lithium, and they can do it because they have affordable energy. Here in Canada, we have very expensive energy and we have very slow approval times. As I said, we're one of the slowest places in which to get a building permit. So even though we have among the biggest supplies of lithium on planet Earth, we produced almost none of it in 2019. And so when you see people driving electric cars, those are cars with batteries that would have been supplied through lithium and other minerals that were produced burning coal. So the purpose of the electric car is supposedly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But if the construction of the car is done burning coal, then by the time that vehicle gets onto the road, it is already responsible for vastly more emissions than a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. How do we change that? Well, we should mine and refine those minerals here in Canada using our hydroelectricity, but we can only do it if we signal to the marketplace that they can get fast permits. It's not acceptable to tell the world's mining investors that they will have to wait 6 or 7 years to get to a maybe, when they can wait 1 year to get to a yes in these other countries. The only way for us to be part of a low emissions transition is for us to speed up, remove the gatekeepers, and get things built, and that will be part of my agenda as well. And we need to extend that to information. Right now the government is considering Bill C-11, which will give gatekeepers at the CRTC the power to control what you see and say on the internet. This is not just an attack on our freedom of expression, but is an attack on our entrepreneurs. Great cultural entrepreneurs and internet influencers, places like British Columbia, where you have J.J. McCullough, who started up a YouTube page and turned it into a personal business. That story would not be possible if he had to rely on the CRTC to determine whether or not he appears in someone's news feed or in their YouTube stream. That this form of censorship will concentrate power among, frankly, central Canadian broadcast corporations who have lobbyists that can influence the CRTC into manipulating social media algorithms and promoting their content above other people's content. But it is a zero-sum game. There is only so much time that people have to watch social media, and as a result, if they're watching more of one thing, they're watching more of less of another, and that means that the government is ultimately going to be pushing down voices that are not favored by the state in order to push up voices that are. This is very dangerous, and according to the social media companies themselves, it is done nowhere on planet Earth outside of Cuba and North Korea. Not the company that we want to keep when it comes to freedom of expression on the internet. So a Poilievre government will repeal this censorship law and restore freedom of expression to the internet. And then we're going to restore sound money in this country. Money is just a technology to transfer value over space and time. It's really all it is. It is a low-weight, highly mobile technology that allows you to take today's work and to turn it into tomorrow's reward. And the problem with inflation is that it messes up that technology. It's like pouring coffee on your hard drive. It messes up your computer. Well, if the information signals that money sends about the value of things get messed up by inflation, then our entire economic system goes into disarray. And we're seeing that now. And the government caused this inflation by printing $500 billion of new cash in the last 2 years. One in every $4 in our economy was created in the last 2 years alone. Our money supply has grown in that time by 27%, even while the goods and services in our economy grew by 2.7%. In other words, the money supply outgrew the goods and services that money buys 10 times over. So what does that mean? More dollars bidding up the price of fewer goods always equals higher prices. It has also caused a perilous bubble, particularly in our real estate sector. House prices went up by 50% since the Bank of Canada started this money printing orgy in spring of 2020. And now interest rates are rising to pull back the inflation that they caused in the first place. That means that a lot of households who bought with using variable rate mortgages and adjustable monthly payments are struggling to pay. They're seeing their payments go up by $2,000 a month in some cases. But now the option of just selling the house to pay off the mortgage is gone because house prices are coming down. And we have the perfect hell for both buyer and seller. The cost to the buyer is up even though the price for the seller is down. But by the cost, I mean the monthly payment, because the monthly payment is a function of both the interest rate and the overall principal. And so both the buyer and the seller are suffering. And we risk seeing foreclosures, bankruptcies, and other economic problems that result. And this is all because governments flooded our economy with easy cash, inflated this asset price, and now are having to pull back suddenly to bring it right back down. This is majorly disruptive to our economy and to our country, and is causing major suffering to ordinary, everyday people. So we're going to restore sound money. And this is how we're going to do it. One, I'm going to reinstate the Bank of Canada's traditional mandate that worked for 25 years, that it has one job and one job only, and that's to keep inflation at 2%, not to print money for politicians to spend. And that is the underlying problem, is the overspending. Overspending by government is the cause of the inflationary disease. $500 billion of deficits by the Trudeau government required the bank to print this money, and then inflationary taxes made it more expensive for businesses to produce the goods and services that we all buy. We need to control spending. Right now, government spending is 30% higher than it was in the last year before COVID. Now, we were told that all the deficits that we were running were just because of COVID, right? No choice. We can't do anything else but to run big deficits. Well, it's true. We needed to fund income replacement for workers and businesses shut down by the state. But of the $500 billion in deficits in 2 years, 40% were totally unrelated to COVID, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officers. New discretionary spending. And as I said, now that COVID's behind us and all those COVID programs are gone, spending is 30% higher than it was before. In other words, the spending is not entirely COVID related. Even the COVID spending itself embedded countless examples of waste. They continued to pay out the CERB benefit, even when there were 1 million vacant jobs and economies were fully reopened. They sent CERB payments to prisoners who were behind bars and to public servants who were simultaneously drawing salaries. They tried to give $500 million to a We Charity. They spent $54 million on an ArriveCan app that we didn't need, didn't work, that wrongly sent 10,000 people into quarantine, even though they were vaccinated and negative tested. And this app could have been designed for $250,000, according to a group of programmers who replicated it in 1 weekend. So these are just examples of the excessive spending that flooded our economy with too much cash. So what are we going to do about it? The Poilievre government is going to pass a law that requires politicians follow the same rules that you do. It's called the pay-as-you-go law. It works like this. The government wants to spend a new dollar that's not already budgeted for. They have to find $1 of savings to pay for it. That's how single moms run their finances, right? Or the Jones family, they want to have a new patio, perhaps they forego the vacation. Or they go down to the local lumber yard and see if there's some wood on sale, and they get a deal on their vacation, so that they make both of those things work within the fixed family budget for recreation. Well, government should be no different. If politicians want to spend more on X, they should spend less on Y, or they should work to find a bargain on both X and Y. Yep. No incentive to do that right now. None. And I'll tell you why. Every creature in the universe has to live with something called scarcity. Whether it's the fish in the seas, or the birds in the trees, or the little microbe on the ground, they all have to make maximal use of limited resources. Every creature has to do that except for the politician, who always just passes on scarcity to everyone else, right? Because they can tax it, borrow it, or print it. But it doesn't eliminate scarcity for the sum total of us. It just redistributes it from the government onto the people. And that's what we've seen over the last several years. The great economist Thomas Sowell said, the number one rule of economics is scarcity. There's never enough supply to meet all of the demand. And then the number one rule of politics is to ignore the number one rule of economics, right? What I want to do is put that scarcity back where it belongs, on the politicians who are spending the money, so that they have to make the same trade-offs that everyday people make in their lives, the same either-or decisions, the same budget-crunching efforts that businesses and families have done since the dawn of humanity. In other words, the Canadian people have been pinching their pennies for long enough. It's time the government in Ottawa started pinching its pennies. And so that that is the goal. It's really to make the government small so the citizen can be big. To remember that in fact government is servant and the citizen is master, and not the other way around. That is what's so special about Canada and other countries that inherited our British parliamentary system. It is meant to give primacy to the common people, the everyday people who do the nation's work. That's why the House of Commons is green, after all, because the first commoners met in the fields as they organized to progressively take more and more power away from the crown and restore it to the people. And that is what we need to do here in Canada. Our government has become too big, too strong, and too arrogant. It has forgotten its role. And our job as citizens is to rise up and remind them, to replace them with a new government that will put you first, your paycheck, your savings, your home, your country. I want to put you back in charge of your life. Let's make this the freest nation on earth. Thank you very much.